A dry canal bed suddenly fills with water, yet not a single drop of rain has fallen. This is the core of a legend that has persisted for centuries, the story of a waterway that floods precisely once every 72 years with no rainfall. By the end of our journey, you will understand how a single natural event can weave together ancient myth, cutting-edge science, and profound human drama. We will examine the forgotten prophecies that predicted these floods and the modern technologies trying to explain them. What hidden force could possibly operate on such a patient, grand timescale? The parchment is brittle, its ink faded to a ghostly brown. This is the Chronicle of the Silent Deluge, the oldest known record of the event, written by a monk named Ilian in a time of profound desperation. He described a land cracked and barren, a community waiting for rain that never came. Then, without warning, the dry stones of the canal bed began to shimmer with a strange light, a precursor to the water that followed. Ilian did not call it a miracle from the heavens. Instead, he wrote of a sleeping earth spirit, a great being that breathed only once in a lifetime, exhaling a river of pure, cold water from the very bedrock of the world. His account is remarkably precise. He recorded the exact date, the height the water reached, and the stunned silence of the villagers who witnessed it. This meticulous detail transformed a single strange event into a pattern. It became a seed planted in the soil of human memory, waiting to sprout into the rich tapestry of folklore that would envelop the canal for centuries to come. But the story did not end with the monk's spiritual interpretation. Centuries later, a different kind of record surfaces, one bound in leather and filled with columns of numbers. This is the ledger of a merchant named Kale, and his account of the flood is not one of divine breath but of pure, practical opportunity. His world was one of dust and profit, where caravans faced the harsh reality of a waterless route. His writings describe a season of near bankruptcy, with goods spoiling and routes becoming too dangerous to traverse. Then the canal filled. For Kale, this was not a miracle of the earth, but a miracle of the market. His meticulous notes detail how the sudden, deep water created a temporary highway through the impassable desert. Barges were hastily built, and for the brief weeks the water flowed, his goods moved with a speed and safety previously unimaginable. He recorded a staggering profit, a windfall that lifted his entire operation from the brink of collapse and brought unexpected wealth to the towns along the canal's banks. Where the monk saw a spirit's exhalation, the merchant saw an economic lifeline. This starkly different perspective challenges the purely mystical narrative. It forces us to ask a new kind of question. What kind of natural process could be so reliable, so perfectly timed, that it could be woven into the very fabric of commerce and survival? The merchant's ledger points away from the heavens and deep into the earth, toward the hidden, geological clockwork that might make such a predictable event possible. The merchant's ledger, filled with calculations of profit and loss, points us toward a different kind of accounting, one that measures the immense pressures building deep within the earth. The leading scientific theory that attempts to explain the 72-year flood involves a colossal, hidden reservoir. Far beneath the dry canal bed, trapped between layers of impermeable rock, lies a vast pressurized aquifer, an ocean of ancient water. This subterranean sea is connected to the surface by a fragile, complex network of fractures and fissures, like a series of sealed pipes leading up from the depths. For decades, these passageways remain blocked, held shut by the immense weight of the surrounding rock. But the earth is never truly still. Tectonic plates grind against one another with unimaginable force, and the stress along this particular fault line builds up slowly, year after year, like a spring being wound tighter and tighter. The 72-year cycle, according to this hypothesis, is the ticking of a geological clock. When the tectonic stress reaches a critical threshold, it causes a slight but significant shift in the crust. This movement releases the pressure on the aquifer's cap, acting like a valve being turned. The pent-up water is then forced upward through the newly opened fissures, erupting into the canal bed not as a violent geyser, but as a steady, rising flood. Seismologists note similar processes elsewhere, where water levels in wells mysteriously rise and fall before earthquakes, a testament to the Earth's hidden plumbing. This scientific lens offers a powerful, naturalistic framework, grounding the miracle in the measurable laws of physics. It transforms the sleeping Earth spirit of folklore into a quantifiable cycle of stress and release. Yet this explanation, so clear to us now, would have been utterly incomprehensible to the monk Ilian or the merchant Kale. Their world was one of spirits and markets, not tectonic plates. How did they reconcile the undeniable reality of the flood with the complete absence of any understanding of the forces that caused it? The human mind abhors a vacuum, especially one of such magnitude. Into this void of understanding stepped the weeping goddess. She is the central figure in the local folklore, a deity born from the human need to clothe the inexplicable in the garments of emotion. The story tells of a goddess of springs and rivers who fell deeply in love with a mortal hunter. Their happiness was brief, shattered when he was lost to a great beast. Every 72 years, the anniversary of his death, her grief becomes so overwhelming that she weeps. Her tears, being divine, do not simply fall. They flow upward from the heart of the earth, filling the canal as a monument to her sorrow. The flood is not a random event, but a scheduled expression of love and loss, as predictable as the ache of a remembered anniversary. This myth transformed the canal from a mere geographical feature into a sacred space, a temple for a goddess's grief. In the years leading up to the predicted flood, villagers would gather at the dry canal bed. They did not come with engineering tools or scientific instruments. They came with offerings, small, handcrafted boats carrying flowers, locks of hair, or precious trinkets were placed carefully on the cracked earth. Songs were sung, not songs of celebration, but gentle, mournful melodies meant to harmonize with the goddess's own sadness. The rituals were an act of empathy. The people were not trying to stop the flood, they were seeking to join it, to acknowledge the pain of the being who provided for them. This personification is a profound psychological tool. An earthquake or a flood is terrifying because it is random and indifferent, but a goddess weeping for her lost love is a tragedy you can understand. Her tears have a reason. The water arrives not as a chaotic force, but as a shared expression of a universal feeling. The myth gave people a sense of participation, a way to feel they could influence, or at least honor, the cycle upon which their survival depended. It turned a geological process into a deeply human drama, where the land itself was capable of memory and emotion. But the search for a pattern was not confined to the earth or its myths. The gaze of ancient astronomers also turned skyward, and they found what they believed was the ultimate key. Their meticulous charts reveal a stunning correlation. The flooding of the canal coincided time and again with a rare and specific alignment of planets. This grand celestial conjunction, a dance of distant worlds falling into a precise formation, was observed to repeat itself approximately every 72 years. To these early sky watchers, the connection was undeniable. They theorized that the combined gravitational pull of these aligned planets acted as a cosmic trigger, literally tugging the waters from their subterranean prison and drawing them up into the canal. much like the moon pulls on the oceans to create the tides, but on a vastly more powerful and infrequent scale. This celestial trigger hypothesis was a breathtakingly elegant solution. It linked the inexplicable event on the ground to the majestic, predictable clockwork of the heavens. It suggested that the canal was not an anomaly, but a part of a grand, universal order. While modern astronomy dismisses the idea that planetary alignments can exert such a direct and dramatic influence on Earth's groundwater, we cannot ignore the sheer observational genius behind the theory. The fact that ancient scholars without telescopes or advanced mathematics could pinpoint a cycle of such immense duration is a testament to human patience and intellect. Their astrological theory was more than superstition. It was a profound attempt to find reason in the chaos, to connect the microcosm of a single waterway to the macrocosm of the solar system. This celestial connection forces a new question. If someone truly believed the stars themselves commanded the flood, would they not try to build a monument worthy of such a cosmic event? The search for the trigger leads us directly to the stones, to the possibility that an ancient civilization did not just observe the phenomenon, but engineered a way to welcome it. The idea of a celestial trigger finds its earthly counterpart in the very stones of the canal bed. While astronomers look to the heavens, a small group of historians and engineers have focused their attention downward on the canal's perplexing physical structure. They propose a radical idea that the canal is not a natural formation at all, but a colossal, ancient piece of hydraulic engineering. Its path is unnaturally straight in some sections, and its bed is lined with a specific type of fitted stone that seems designed to minimize water absorption. Most tellingly, along its length, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of what appear to be sophisticated sluice gates and massive, bell-shaped catchment basins. These features make little sense for a river or a typical irrigation canal that flows consistently. Why build complex gates and vast reservoirs for a waterway that is dry for 7 decades at a time? The answer, according to this theory, is that a forgotten civilization did not just witness the 72-year flood, they anticipated it. They somehow understood the cycle and engineered a monumental system to harness it. The canal was not a lucky accident of geography. It was a deliberate interface with a powerful and predictable natural force. The sluice gates would have allowed them to control the direction of the surging water, diverting it into the catchment basins where it could be stored for years, transforming a brief, miraculous event into a sustained resource for agriculture and survival. This vision transforms the canal from a passive wonder into an active testament to human ingenuity. It suggests a society that possessed not only advanced engineering skills, but also a profound, long-term understanding of their environment, thinking in scales of time that span generations. This stands in stark contrast to the chaotic interpretation of the flood as a purely random act of a weeping goddess. It presents an ancient world that was rational, observant, and masterful in its manipulation of the landscape. Yet, if such an advanced civilization existed capable of this grand-scale foresight, why did they vanish, leaving behind only these cryptic stone clues? The silence of the ruins speaks to a mystery as deep as the flood itself. History itself was rewritten by the water's arrival. In the imperial archives, the 72-year flood was never recorded as a simple weather event. It was a political earthquake. Dynastic chronicles reveal that the filling of the canal was interpreted as the ultimate divine referendum on a ruler's mandate. A new emperor who ascended the throne just before or during a flood was seen as chosen by the cosmos itself, his reign blessed and legitimized by this spectacular natural alignment. His coronation was not just a ceremony, it was a prophecy fulfilled. court poets would compose elaborate verses linking the purity of the rising water to the wisdom of the young king, suggesting the very earth was offering its approval. But this celestial endorsement had a dark, unforgiving flip side. If the canal flooded during a period of famine, rebellion, or military defeat, the event was instantly recast as a sign of profound heavenly displeasure. The water was no longer a blessing but a condemnation. Rival factions within the court would seize upon the phenomenon, whispering that the gods were washing away the current dynasty's legitimacy. The flood became a powerful weapon in the arsenal of political intrigue, a tool to destabilize a vulnerable ruler and justify a coup. The canal's predictable cycle was thus transformed into a clock for political destiny. Ambitious princes would plan their rebellions to coincide with the expected year, hoping to harness the powerful symbolism of the event. A dying king, aware the flood was due, might desperately accelerate public works or launch a military campaign to prove his worth before the waters judged him. This was more than superstition, it was a sophisticated system of social control. By linking their power to an undeniable, cyclical force of nature, rulers could claim a permanence and divine right that transcended their own mortal lives. The water carried not just life but the crushing weight of prophecy and kingly fate. Yet this manipulation of a natural event raises a troubling question. What happened to the people who lived through the times when the prophecy failed, when the waters did not come as promised? The intersection of power and nature inevitably creates victims, those who dared to challenge the official narrative and paid a terrible price. The weight of prophecy and kingly fate fell not only on emperors but on every soul living in the shadow of the canal. As the 72nd year drew near, the entire community began to move with a shared, purposeful rhythm. The approach of the flood was not a time for silent waiting, but for a great and elaborate symphony of preparation. The dry, cracked earth of the canal bed became a stage for one of the most profound rituals any society could perform. Long before the first shimmer of water was expected, a solemn procession would wind its way along the canal's edge. The entire village, from the eldest elder to the youngest child, would walk together, their footsteps a collective drumbeat marking the passage of time. They carried not tools for digging, but brooms made of sacred grasses and baskets of scented herbs. Their task was not to dig, but to cleanse. With great care and reverence, they would sweep the canal bed clear of debris, of fallen stones, and the accumulated dust of decades. This was far more than simple maintenance. It was a symbolic act of welcome, a way of preparing a sacred vessel to receive a divine gift. The physical cleaning mirrored a spiritual one, a communal effort to purify their own intentions and make themselves worthy of the coming miracle. Music filled the air during these days, but it was not the sound of celebration. It was a low, haunting melody played on reed flutes and skin drums, a sound meant to harmonize with the imagined sorrow of the weeping goddess. The songs were ancient, their words so old their original meaning was lost, yet everyone knew the melodies by heart. This was the sound of memory itself, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, a direct auditory link to the last time the waters came. For the children who swept alongside their parents, these ceremonies were their first real lesson about the world they inhabited. They learned not from a book, but by doing. They felt the texture of the dry earth. They heard the stories whispered as they worked. They understood that they were part of something much larger than themselves. The ritual was a perfect engine of cultural transmission, ensuring that the knowledge of the cycle and the proper way to respond to it would never be forgotten. It transformed a potentially terrifying natural anomaly, a force that could easily be seen as chaotic or vengeful, into a celebrated and integral part of life. The community was not a victim of a mysterious cycle. They were its active participants, its honored guests. This collective effort required guidance, a steady hand to conduct the symphony. That responsibility fell to a single, crucial individual, the guardian of the canal's deepest secrets. This sacred responsibility did not fall to the community at large, but was carried by a single, carefully chosen bloodline. The Keepers were the living heart of the cycle, a lineage of guardians whose sole purpose was to watch, to remember, and to calculate. Their knowledge was not written in books that could be lost to fire or decay. It was etched into memory, passed from parent to child in hushed tones during long nights spent staring at the stars. The selection of the next keeper was a matter of profound gravity. It was not simply a matter of birth order. A child's temperament was scrutinized, their patience tested, their memory challenged. The chosen one had to possess a unique blend of qualities, the sharp, analytical mind of a scientist and the quiet, receptive soul of a priest. They learned to track the subtle wobbles of distant planets, to measure the minute shifts in the groundwater levels in deep wells, and to interpret the behavior of animals as signs of the Earth's changing mood. They were the bridge between the observable world and the great mystery, translating the language of nature into a prediction that could shape an empire. Their calculations were a secret art, a fusion of precise astronomy and intuitive Earth lore. They knew, for instance, that when a certain constellation reached its zenith and the roots of the ancient willow by the canal grew unusually thick, the time was near. This was not guesswork, it was a sophisticated, multi-generational data set, refined over centuries. The Keeper's final pronouncement, delivered to the village elders, would set in motion the great cleansing ritual. Their word was law because their word was believed to be the Earth's own. The survival of the legend and the survival of the people who depended on it rested entirely on the unbroken chain of their memory. But what happens when that chain is broken? The modern world, with its precise satellite clocks and global communication networks, has little need for a solitary figure reading the stars. The old Keeper families saw their role diminish, their children drawn away by the promises of cities and new technologies. The last true Keeper, an old man named Ilara, died decades ago, taking with him the final, untaught nuances of the calculation. His descendants may still live in the area, but they are engineers and teachers now, their ancestral knowledge reduced to a family story, a curious heirloom with no practical use. This loss is a quiet tragedy that echoes across the globe, the fading of a deep, place-based wisdom that cannot be replicated by a smartphone app. It was a knowledge system built on intimacy with a specific landscape, a conversation between a people and their home that has now fallen silent. The Keepers ensured the legend's survival for 1,000 years, but their disappearance contains a stark warning about the fragility of human memory when it is no longer tied to survival. And so, with the Guardians gone, the stage was left to a new kind of observer, one armed not with ancestral wisdom, but with steel and wire. The legend of the Canal is not merely a story of wonder, but a repository of dire warnings. Tales passed down through generations speak of communities that forgot their place in the natural order, treating the predictable cycle as a challenge rather than a gift. In one such account, a wealthy landowner, impatient for the water to irrigate his new fields, ordered his workers to dig deep into the canal bed, convinced they could coax the water forth ahead of its celestial schedule. They dug for months, creating a scar in the earth, but found only dust and rock. When the true flood finally arrived 72 years later, their artificial channels collapsed, and the unleashed water carved a new, destructive path that flooded the landowner's own village. The story concludes with a simple, chilling lesson. The earth gives only when it is ready, not when we demand. Another parable tells of a growing town that saw the dry canal bed as wasted space. Over the decades of dryness, they built granaries and homes directly on the smooth, hard-packed earth, believing the legend of the flood to be an exaggeration for children. The elders protested, their voices drowned out by the promise of convenience and expansion. When the water returned, it did not ask for permission. The carefully constructed buildings were not just flooded, they were utterly erased, pulverized by the gentle but immense force of the rising water, a force that had been gathering for a lifetime. These stories function as powerful ecological parables long before the word ecology existed. They teach a fundamental truth that some natural rhythms operate on a timescale far exceeding our own short lives. To ignore this is the height of arrogance, a belief that our immediate needs can override the deep, patient pulse of the planet. The Canal cycle demanded a perspective measured in generations, not harvests. This moral dimension elevates the myth from a simple wonder tale to a guide for sustainable living. It encodes a principle of humility and respect for forces greater than ourselves, a thread of ancient wisdom that finds a startling echo in our modern understanding of environmental balance. The dry canal bed became a blank page upon which generations of writers inscribed their deepest anxieties and hopes. A renowned poet from the 19th century, Alaric Vane, did not write about the water itself, but about the long, dry wait. In his most famous sonnet, he compared the 72-year silence to a heart holding its breath after a great sorrow, the cracked earth a map of internal desolation. For Vane, the eventual flood was not a miracle, but a catharsis, the moment when suppressed feeling finally breaks its banks and washes the landscape clean. His work transformed a geological event into a powerful metaphor for emotional resilience, suggesting that what lies dormant within us is not dead, only waiting for its own season to return. Novelists, in turn, saw the Canal as the perfect setting for dramas of patience and fate. In Ilara Vance's sprawling epic, The 72nd Spring, two lovers are separated by a family feud on the eve of a flood. The man is exiled, forced to wander the world, while the woman remains by the canal, her life defined by the agonizing wait for the next rising of the waters, which she believes will signal his return. The entire novel is structured around this immense anticipation, with the cyclical nature of the canal mirroring the cyclical nature of hope itself. The flood becomes a character in the story, an impartial arbiter of destiny that tests the faith of every person in the village. These stories resonated far beyond the canal's geographic location because they tapped into a universal human truth. We all understand what it means to wait for something transformative, to measure our lives by the slow ticking of a clock we cannot see. This artistic legacy demonstrates how a local wonder can be adopted by the global imagination. The canal ceased to be just a place and became an idea. It became a symbol for anything that operates on a grand, patient timescale, from the slow work of historical justice to the gradual healing of a personal wound. Artists instinctively recognized that the canal's true power lay in its structure, a long silence punctuated by a brief, overwhelming event. This pattern mirrors the way memory works, how a scent or a sound can suddenly unleash a torrent of forgotten experiences. It reflects the rhythm of history itself, where eras of quiet stability are shattered by moments of rapid, irreversible change. By giving this natural phenomenon a human voice, poets and novelists allowed everyone to find a piece of their own story in the legend. They revealed that the greatest mysteries are not always out in the world, but are reflected back to us from the still waters of our own souls, a concept that would soon captivate an entirely new field of study. This psychological lens reveals the canal's true power lies not in the water but in the pattern. The 72-year cycle of dormancy and sudden release is a rhythm that resonates deep within the human psyche. It mirrors the way our own minds work, Think of a repressed memory hidden for decades that suddenly surfaces with perfect clarity, or consider the creative breakthrough that arrives only after a long period of frustrating stagnation. These are our personal floods, moments where something essential bursts forth from the depths of our unconscious. The legend of the Canal gives this internal, often chaotic, process a tangible and shared form. It provides a communal story for the universal experience of transformation, a narrative that makes our private struggles feel part of a grand, natural design. This is perhaps why similar myths appear across vastly different cultures, from tales of sleeping giants whose breath creates rivers to legends of underground oceans that rise on a sacred schedule. They are not describing the same geological event, but they are all giving voice to the same profound archetype, a fundamental human understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear. We instinctively recognize that growth is not a constant upward climb, but a series of long preparations and sudden, decisive leaps. The Canal story persists because it helps us articulate the most mysterious parts of our own lives. It asks us a deeply personal question. What floods are waiting within you? What potential lies dormant, gathering strength through years of quiet patience, only to emerge when the conditions are exactly right? This introspective view shifts the wonder from the outside world to the inner one, suggesting that the greatest mysteries we explore may not be in the landscape, but reflected back at us from its silent, patient waters. The psychological resonance of this cycle finds its mirror in the grand tapestry of world mythology. Far from being an isolated wonder, the story of our Canal is a single thread in a global fabric of legends built around patient, recurring natural events. In the cold mists of Norse mythology, there is the Well of Mimir, a source of infinite wisdom guarded by the head of the god himself. Odin, the All-Father, did not gain his knowledge in a single visit. He had to sacrifice an eye for a single drink, a symbolic exchange that suggests true understanding is not a one-time gift, but something earned in painful, cyclical increments. The wisdom flows, but only when the price is paid again, echoing the long wait for the Canal's life-giving water. On the other side of the world, the Aboriginal Australian concept of the dreaming presents an even more profound parallel. This is not a mythology of the past, but a continuous, living narrative where the actions of ancestral beings created the world. Specific songlines or dreaming tracks map the journeys of these ancestors, and the paths they walked often became rivers. The flow of these rivers is not taken for granted. It is understood as a direct response to the proper performance of rituals and songs. If the people forget the songs, the river may dwindle. Here, the cycle is not automatic. It is a sacred partnership between humanity and the land, a responsibility to maintain the world through memory and action, much like the village's cleansing ritual. These stories, separated by vast oceans and millennia, all grapple with the same fundamental puzzle. How do we explain the great, slow rhythms of the earth that operate on a scale longer than a human life? The answer across cultures was to weave these rhythms into story. They personified the forces of nature, not out of childish ignorance, but as the most powerful tool available to make the inexplicable meaningful. A river that floods every 72 years is a terrifying mystery, but a goddess weeping for her lost love is a tragedy we can understand. A well that grants wisdom only through sacrifice is a principle we can apply to our own lives. By comparing these myths, we see that our Canal's legend is not an outlier. It is a local expression of a universal human need to find pattern, purpose, and emotional connection in the patient heartbeat of the planet. This global context transforms our mystery from a solitary curiosity into a vital chapter in humanity's longest story, the story of how we learned to listen to the earth. And as our methods of listening evolved, so too did our ability to measure the immeasurable, turning from the language of myth to the precise mathematics of prediction. This biological patience finds its ultimate expression in the dry canal bed itself, a landscape that appears barren only to the untrained eye. The 71 years of silence are not an empty pause in the drama of life, but a distinct and vital act. A specialized ecosystem has evolved in perfect synchrony with the great cycle, treating the long drought not as a catastrophe, but as a necessary season of rest. The most remarkable players in this drama are the seeds. Known as hard-seeded legumes, these tiny time capsules can lie dormant in the sun-baked earth for decades, their shells so tough they are virtually impervious to water. They wait not for a simple spring rain, but for the specific chemical signature and sustained saturation of the unique aquifer water. When the flood finally arrives, it is not just water, but a key that unlocks them. Within days of the ground softening, the canal floor erupts in a carpet of vibrant blue and yellow flowers, a spectacle of life that has been waiting 72 years for its moment in the sun. This is not a random bloom, it is a scheduled explosion of color, a biological celebration timed to a geological clock. The rhythm of the water dictates the rhythm of entire lives. A species of burrowing beetle times its own life cycle to this grand schedule. The adult beetles emerge from their deep burrows just weeks before the flood is due, guided by an instinct we cannot fully comprehend. They mate and lay their eggs in the damp soil left by the receding waters. Their larvae will feed on the decaying plant matter from the brief bloom, growing slowly underground for the next 72 years until it is their turn to emerge and continue the cycle. Larger animals have also learned the schedule. Herds of desert antelope, their migration routes passed down through generations, make a detour to the canal area in the year the water is expected. They arrive just as the new plant growth provides a lush, temporary pasture, a life-saving oasis in an otherwise harsh landscape. This entire ecosystem operates on a timescale that dwarfs human impatience. We see a dry riverbed and think of absence. Nature, in its profound wisdom, sees a phase in a much longer conversation. The silence is not emptiness, it is a gathering. The cracked earth is not a wasteland, but a library of life, its volumes written in dormant seeds and sleeping larvae, waiting for the right page to be turned. This slow, majestic dance of adaptation challenges our modern obsession with speed and constant productivity. It suggests that true resilience is not about resisting change, but about learning to move in time with the deepest rhythms of the world. The new investigators arrived with tools that would have seemed like sorcery to the old keepers. Their ground-penetrating radar sent invisible pulses deep into the earth, painting a picture of the hidden world below the canal bed. Instead of a sleeping spirit, they mapped the contours of a vast, pressurized aquifer, precisely as the geological theory had predicted. Networks of sensors, planted like mechanical seeds, monitored the slightest tremor, the faintest shift in subterranean pressure, listening for the first whispers of the Earth's great exhalation. Scientists collected water samples from the rare pools left after a flood, analyzing their isotopic signatures like detectives reading a fingerprint. The results were clear. This water was ancient, having percolated through layers of rock for millennia, completely isolated from the contemporary water cycle. It was the strongest evidence yet that the flood was not a meteorological event, but a geological one, a release of pent-up ancient energy. Yet for every mystery solved, a new enigma emerged. The same water samples revealed anomalous mineral deposits, crystals that should not form under the conditions of a simple aquifer release. Their presence hinted at a far more complex journey, perhaps through a series of interconnected chambers or past volcanic heat sources deep within the crust. The scientific quest to demystify the legend had not stripped it of its wonder. Instead, it had revealed a deeper, more intricate reality. The simple story of a stressed fault opening a valve was now complicated by evidence of a labyrinthine underground world, a hidden geography more fantastic than any myth of a weeping goddess. This process, the dialogue between measurement and mystery, is embodied in the very instruments themselves. A core sample extracted from the canal bed is more than just a cylinder of dirt. It is a physical timeline. Its layers a record of every past flood, a library of sediment waiting to be read. Each stratum of silt, deposited by a different 72-year event, contains pollen from the flowers that bloomed that year, ash from long-extinct volcanoes, and even traces of metals from the tools of the people who witnessed it. The scientific instruments do not silence the legend. They give it a new voice, one that speaks in the language of data, adding a chorus of hard evidence to the ancient songs. The myth provided the question, and science is now providing a much more complex, and in many ways more beautiful, set of answers. This collaboration between story and scanner raises a profound possibility. If we can now read the canal's history with such precision, could we finally predict its future with absolute certainty? Or does the very nature of this deep time event defy our modern obsession with control? A new eye in the sky has transformed the dry canal from a local legend into a global observation post. The advent of satellite technology allows scientists to watch the entire watershed as a single, living system. For decades, these silent sentinels have been capturing images, creating a time-lapse movie of the land's slow breath. From this vantage point, changes invisible to anyone standing on the ground become starkly clear. In the years leading up to the predicted flood, satellite radar can detect a subtle uplift in the canal bed, a swelling of the earth as the immense pressure builds in the aquifer below. It is as if the planet itself is taking a deep, 72-year breath, and we can now see its chest rise. At the same time, sensors that measure surface moisture and plant health might detect a faint greening along the canal's path, a sign that deep-rooted plants are tapping into the slowly rising water table long before any liquid reaches the surface. This big data approach provides a macroscopic view that the old keepers could never have accessed. Their knowledge was profound, but it was intimate, gathered from a single point on the map. The satellites see the whole picture, revealing how the canal cycle is connected to regional water tables and the slow grind of tectonic plates hundreds of miles away. Remote sensing has turned the entire region into a vast, open-air laboratory. Researchers can now test their geological hypotheses on a grand scale, correlating the canal's uplift with seismic activity across the fault line. This technological perspective does not strip the legend of its magic. Instead, it adds a new layer of awe. The story of the weeping goddess was a beautiful, human-scale explanation. The satellite data reveals a reality that is, in its own way, just as magnificent, a complex planetary mechanism operating with a patient, majestic precision. This fusion of ancient story and modern science invites a bold, new question. If we can watch the Earth prepare for its great exhale, can we also learn to predict other long-term cycles, perhaps even those that govern the rise and fall of civilizations themselves? The satellites see the swelling Earth, but on the ground, the approach of the 72nd year now triggers a different kind of seismic event, an economic one. The quiet villages near the canal, for so long the keepers of a patient secret, are suddenly thrust onto the global stage. The dry riverbed becomes a destination. Hotels that stood half empty for decades are fully booked years in advance. Local guides who once learned the stories from their grandparents now recite them for busloads of visitors from every corner of the world. Cafes expand their terraces and artisans craft miniature replica boats, turning the sacred offerings of old into souvenirs. This is no longer just a cycle of water, it is a cycle of currency, a scheduled windfall that entire communities have come to depend upon. The flood has been rebranded. It is the Great Return, a natural spectacle marketed alongside solar eclipses and meteor showers, an event you can plan your vacation around. This modern-day gold rush is a double-edged sword. The influx of money provides vital infrastructure, schools get new roofs and roads are paved, but it also brings a relentless pressure to perform, to turn a profound spiritual occurrence into a reliable product. The challenge becomes one of preservation on an entirely new scale. How do you protect the silence of a place when the world arrives with cameras? The very rituals that define the community for centuries are now staged for an audience. The haunting flute melodies, once meant to harmonize with a goddess's grief, are amplified through speakers so the crowds at the back can hear. The intimate act of sweeping the canal bed is now a media event, with drones buzzing overhead capturing every symbolic stroke. This commodification raises urgent questions about authenticity. Is the ritual still a genuine expression of faith if it is performed, in part, for the benefit of tourists? Or has it become a kind of living theater, a reenactment of a fading tradition? The community grapples with this new reality. Some elders worry that the meaning is being washed away by the flood of attention, that the sacred is being diluted by the commercial. Yet, younger generations see an opportunity. They are using the global platform to share their heritage with a wider audience, arguing that the story is too important to be kept secret. They livestream the cleansing ceremonies, translating the old songs into dozens of languages, ensuring the legend survives in the digital ecosystem. This transformation of a local wonder into a shared human experience is perhaps the most significant flood of all. The water still rises from the same ancient source, but its meaning now flows through fiber optic cables, touching people who will never set foot on the cracked earth. The canal's story is no longer bound by geography. It has become a part of our collective imagination, a reminder that we are all drawn to mysteries that operate on a timescale grander than our own. But this global embrace creates a new vulnerability. When a wonder becomes a commodity, its value is measured in clicks and revenue, and that demand can push a fragile ecosystem past its breaking point. The greatest threat to the legend was not disbelief but silence. As the last generation who witnessed the previous flood grows older, their memories risk fading away forever. In quiet living rooms and under the shade of ancient trees, a new kind of ritual now takes place. Instead of a village elder speaking to a circle of children, a historian sets up a microphone and a small camera. The goal is not to replace the oral tradition, but to preserve its final, living echoes. These digital archives capture more than just the date the water arrived or the height it reached. They record the tremor in a woman's voice as she describes the scent of wet earth after 72 years of dust, a smell her grandmother told her to remember. They save the melody of a song meant to comfort the weeping goddess, sung by a man whose own father taught him the notes. A single anecdote about a child dropping a carved wooden bird into the canal and watching it float away becomes as valuable as a geological core sample. It is the human sediment of the event, the emotional truth that gives the dry facts their lasting power. This project is a race against time, an attempt to build a Noah's Ark for intangible culture before the flood of forgetting sweeps it all away. The resulting digital library is a mosaic of individual experiences. One recording might feature a farmer explaining how the specific mineral content of the floodwater made his fields fertile for a decade. Another might hold a craftsman's memory of the unique sound the water made as it first trickled over the stones, a sound he has tried to replicate in his pottery ever since. Each voice adds a unique thread to the tapestry, ensuring that the story is not flattened into a single, official version, but remains a chorus of perspectives. This high-tech preservation effort is ironically the modern equivalent of the old keeper's duty. Where the keeper memorized the celestial signs, the digital archivist safeguards the human testimony. The vessel has changed from memory to a server farm, but the sacred charge remains the same, to ensure that the knowledge of the cycle survives for the next 72 years and beyond. In this new chapter, the legend is translated into ones and zeros, a binary code that holds the warmth of 1,000 whispered stories, waiting for a future generation to press play. Yet every legend casts a shadow of doubt. For every voice that speaks of earth spirits and celestial triggers, another offers a more grounded, if less romantic, explanation. Skeptical researchers point to the immense challenge of historical record-keeping, suggesting the 72-year cycle could be a statistical illusion. Imagine a series of truly random, catastrophic floods separated by decades. Over centuries, human minds, desperate for pattern, might weave these disconnected events into a neat, predictable timeline in hindsight. The number 72 itself invites scrutiny. Is it a precise measurement of time, or is it something else? In many ancient cultures, 72 is a number heavy with symbolism. It can represent 3 generations, a complete astrological age, or a sacred numerical unit. The skeptics argue that the cycle might be a literary device, a way to encode a spiritual truth about renewal and patience into the landscape, rather than a report of a physical fact. Another theory proposes that several different types of rare floods have been conflated into one legend. A major earthquake might have opened an aquifer once. A period of unprecedented rainfall far upstream might have caused a flash flood another time, and a landslide blocking a distant river could have created a temporary lake that burst its banks decades later. From a distance of centuries, these separate tragedies, each with its own cause, could easily be remembered as repetitions of the same miraculous event. Engaging with these counterarguments is not an attempt to ruin a good story. It is a necessary act of intellectual honesty. It forces us to ask difficult questions. Where is the hard, physical evidence beyond the stories? Can we find geological layers that correspond exactly to a 72-year rhythm, and not a 60 or 80-year one? This healthy skepticism is the grit in the oyster, the friction that eventually produces a pearl of more robust understanding. It ensures our fascination with the mystery is tempered by a respect for verifiable truth, preparing us to weigh all the evidence, both for and against, with clear eyes. Perhaps the deepest truth of the Canal is that it never demanded we choose a single explanation. The story's enduring power comes not from proving the weeping goddess wrong or the aquifer model right, but from understanding how they illuminate different facets of the same profound reality. Science gives us the breathtaking mechanics, the slow grind of tectonic plates, and the immense pressure of ancient water. It describes the how. Mythology, however, gives us the why, weaving the event into a tapestry of love, loss, and memory that our hearts can immediately understand. The Canal is a rare place where these two ways of knowing, the empirical and the emotional, do not conflict, but converse. It is a point of intersection where the patient, inhuman scale of geological time crashes directly into the brief, urgent pulse of human time. We measure our lives in years, but the Canal measures its life in generations. Our need to find meaning in that disparity is what created the legend in the first place. To see the Canal only as a hydrological puzzle is to miss its soul. To see it only as a fairy tale is to ignore its magnificent physical reality. The synthesis is where the true wonder lies. It is both a pressurized aquifer and a goddess's tear. It is both a predictable release of subterranean stress and a scheduled expression of cosmic grief. This layered understanding allows us to appreciate the phenomenon in its full depth, as a natural wonder that obeys physical laws, an ancient engineering marvel that showcases human ingenuity, a cultural touchstone that binds communities together, and a psychological archetype that speaks to the patient rhythms within our own minds. The Canal does not offer a simple answer. It invites us into a richer relationship with the world, one where data and story are not enemies, but partners in unraveling a mystery that is, ultimately, as much about us as it is about the water. Our modern world is built on the rhythm of the next quarter, the next election cycle, the next trending topic. The Canal's 72-year heartbeat stands in stark opposition to this relentless short-termism, offering a radical lesson in environmental patience. This is not a story about a single flood, but about the profound value of observing the world on a timescale that respects its own natural tempo. The true crisis of climate change is not just one of rising temperatures, but a crisis of time perception. We struggle to mobilize against a threat that unfolds over decades because our institutions and our attention spans are calibrated for immediacy. The legend of the Canal forces a different perspective. It demonstrates that the most vital planetary processes are not loud, daily events, but quiet, patient cycles that reveal themselves only to those who watch for generations. The old keepers understood this. Their role was not to react to a crisis, but to maintain a vigil, to hold a memory that would only become relevant long after they were gone. This intergenerational knowledge is the very asset we are losing in our fight against environmental collapse. We have countless data points about carbon ppm and global temperature averages, but we have largely forgotten how to think in units of time that span a human lifetime. The Canal cycle is a physical manifestation of a truth we desperately need to relearn, that some solutions require a commitment that we will not live to see the full benefit of. Planting a tree whose shade you will never sit under is the same principle as sweeping a canal bed for a flood your grandchildren will witness. It is an act of faith in the future, a declaration that our responsibility extends beyond our own brief moment. The Canal, in this light, becomes a symbol for the kind of long-term stewardship our planet demands. It asks us to make decisions today based on a world 72 years from now, a world we can only imagine but are duty-bound to protect. This ancient legend, born from the dust of a dry riverbed, may hold one of the most modern keys to our survival, a reminder that the most important time is always the time we cannot see. The calendar has been marked, based on the last recorded event and the convergence of geological data. The next great flood is projected for the year 2096. This is no longer a date from a dusty chronicle. It is an appointment on our collective horizon, a future event that children born today may well live to see. The prediction is no longer whispered by a solitary keeper reading the stars, but calculated by supercomputers crunching satellite data on tectonic stress and aquifer pressure. The countdown has begun, and with it, a new chapter in the legend unfolds, one defined by global anticipation and technological witness. Local authorities are already drafting plans for the influx of millions of visitors, designing viewing platforms that minimize ecological impact and emergency services protocols for an event that is both a spectacle and a potential hazard. The quiet canal bed is now a site of quiet preparation, with engineers reinforcing ancient stonework not to force the water, but to gently guide its predictable power. This forward-looking perspective transforms the canal from a relic into a living event. The question is no longer what happened, but what will happen when the world is watching through a billion lenses. How will the experience change when the first trickle of water is broadcast live across the planet, when the haunting flute melodies are sampled into a digital symphony? Some fear that the intimate, spiritual gravity of the moment will be lost in a cacophony of notifications and shared videos. Yet others argue that this global connection could amplify the wonder, creating a shared moment of planetary awe, a silent, simultaneous intake of breath from people of every culture as the Earth performs its ancient ritual. The legend is escaping its geographical boundaries, becoming a story that belongs to everyone. We are no longer just observers of a cycle, we are active participants in its retelling. The next flood will be the most documented natural event in history, its data collected by drones and its emotions passed through social media reactions. This digital deluge will create a permanent record, but will it capture the scent of the wet earth, the collective hush of the crowd, the profound sense of connection to a rhythm far older than our own? The Canal's next breath will be a conversation between the deep time of the planet and the real time of the network, and we are all now part of that dialogue, waiting to see what story the water will tell next. The canal that floods once every 72 years with no rainfall is far more than a hydrological oddity. It is a nexus, a singular point where geology, mythology, history, and human psychology converge into a single, flowing story. Its enduring legend reminds us that mystery is not the enemy of understanding, but often its most powerful catalyst. It was the inexplicable nature of the flood that drove the monk to record it, the merchant to profit from it, and the scientist to scan the earth for its cause. Our need to solve the puzzle is what pushes knowledge forward, blending the intuitive wisdom of the keeper with the precise data of the satellite. This story challenges us to look deeper, to value both the cold, hard facts of empirical data and the warm, human truths of the stories we tell to make sense of our world. One is the map, the other is the journey. The Aquifer model explains the mechanics of the water, but the myth of the weeping goddess explains the mechanics of the heart. We need both to fully comprehend the wonder, as we await the next turn of its ancient cycle in the year 2096. Let this story inspire you to seek out the hidden rhythms and unexplained wonders in your own surroundings. What long-term cycles are you a part of? Perhaps it is the slow growth of a community garden, the generational story of your family, or the patient turning of the seasons in a local forest. Share your thoughts on the long-term mysteries you have encountered in the comments below, and subscribe to continue exploring the world's greatest enigmas with us.